My approach to a staff member is that perfection isn't the goal, that progress is the goal.
That's good.
If you approach it with perfection in mind, it's going to leave you extremely disappointed, frustrated. You're going to find yourself becoming very cynical and critical of people. But if you approach it with progress as the goal, then it's going to leave you feeling fulfilled. It's going to leave you like inspired that I am making a difference because I'm not pursuing after perfection. I'm pursuing after progress.
Hi there. Welcome back to the Christian Leader Made Simple podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Franklin, and this is a show where we help you learn and master the skills you need to grow your leadership effectiveness and enjoyment. And if you don't want to miss an episode, be sure to hit the subscribe button and the bell on YouTube or the subscribe button on your favorite podcast platform to get notified as soon as I post a new session. And before we get started, I do want to mention that I have a great product called the Christian Leader Blueprint. It's a solid model for leadership development to help you establish a better rhythm of life, to see yourself more clearly, to leverage your strengths, and to build more productive relationships. And I want to give you the short guide as my gift. You can go to ryanfranklin.org and you can download it for free today. And so without any further delay, let's get to our session. I'm excited today to have on the podcast a close friend of mine, Garen Stanley. And I want to start by telling you a little bit about Garen. Garen has been married to Barbara for 16 years. I can't even believe it's been that long. And they have 3 small kids, Gunnar, Oakland, and Kylan. And since his late teens, Garen has always been a heavy producer in some sort of ministry. He was bivocational, which means that he had a full-time job, and he was in full-time ministry for 13 years. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. But about 2 years ago, he was promoted as POA student pastor. And since he's taken it over, he's worked very hard to continue to build on the legacy of ministry that went before him. And he now leads a student ministry staff of 35 volunteers. And so I wanted to have Garen on the show today, first of all, for my listeners to meet one of my good friends. And he's a phenomenal person. But secondly, to talk about the ins and outs of building a student ministry leadership team. And I do want to mention to you that if you're not in student ministry and you listen to this podcast, don't tune us out. This is just as applicable to any ministry or organization that you may lead in. So, Garen, welcome to the Christian Leader Made Simple podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Appreciate you being here.
Absolutely.
So let's jump right in to our questions. We've got a list of questions here, and I personally, I've never had an interest in leading a student ministry. That's not been my forte or my calling. So I'm just curious, what inspired you to become a student pastor, and how did you get started in ministry years ago?
Probably the simplest answer would be I had, in my opinion, the greatest youth pastor of all time. His name was Tim Rutledge, and he was doing things in that time period that no other youth pastor was doing. And so it was really interesting, and it caused me to become very curious and inspired by what he was doing. And then also I have developed some really close friendships from staff members that led me, and they stuck close with me during some of the most challenging seasons of my life. And I think that the combination of my youth pastor and youth staff kind of came together for me and caused me to have a sincere passion and a desire to do the same for somebody else. So
yeah. And so as you I guess explored that more, you felt a sincere call of the Lord on your life in regards to, even deepening that, not just a youth staff member, but also a youth student pastor at this point?
I started running a Spotlight. It's kind of like my first ministry. We had second hour Sunday school back then, and my youth pastor asked me if I would run a Spotlight. And so it all started from there. I got connected running a Spotlight. And
now the spotlight's on you.
Well, sometimes. But yeah, it's kind of how it all got started from there. He invested in me, took me to lunch. He saw potential in me that I didn't see in myself. And then through that, I did feel God calling me to something deeper. I wasn't always sure what it was, but I knew that there was something unique that God had given to me, and through my youth pastor and through my youth staff investing in me, reaching out to me when I may have fallen off the boat, that kept something alive in me, and now it's my opportunity to give it back to somebody else. So
yeah, and I hope our listeners are kind of clocking into what you're saying, because I'm sure that they have people that they lead either in student ministry or other ministries or whatever, that maybe they're struggling to invest in, they're having to support and maybe bail out at times of situations, and yet you never know what's going to happen to that person's future, such as with you, Garen, the fact that you were in tough situations, they helped you, and here you are today.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So you now have 35 volunteer team members who make up your leadership team. How did you and how do you approach building a student ministry leadership team? And to further that question, what qualities do you look for in potential team members?
I think to the first question, I think the key word is approach. How do you approach it? And for me, my approach to a staff member is that perfection isn't the goal, that progress is the goal.
That's good.
If you approach it with perfection in mind, it's going to leave you extremely disappointed, frustrated. You're going to find yourself becoming very cynical and critical of people. But if you approach it with progress is the goal, then it's going to leave you feeling fulfilled. It's going to leave you like inspired that I am making a difference, because I'm not pursuing after perfection. I'm pursuing after progress. And so that's the way I approach it with people. I think you can become so mission driven, and you can do it for the reasons of, I want a pat on the back from pastor. If your goal is trying to hit a certain attendance number, you're pursuing after that perfection. You can almost forget that people make up the mission. Yeah. It's really the people that make up your ministry. And so for me, I just pursue after trying to make some progress with individuals on my team.
I love that.
And then the second part, how do I enact that? Maybe some practical tips. For us, I try to paint the picture as clear as I can to the individuals when I'm approaching to build it. I let them see my passion and my drive, and the way that I lead is through relationship basis. Because if I can have a relationship with that individual, I try to bring people onto the team. Do I need their certain character traits? Do I need things that I can see in them that I don't have? Does that person fulfill a need that Refuge Ministries currently has? Are they teachable? Yeah. Things like that.
So the only way that you could actually do that, what you're talking about, is to truly have a relationship with them. You've got to get in their lives. You've got to go to lunch with them. You've got to have couples over to your home or whatever, or out to eat for dinner or whatever, and just spend time with them in order to build those productive relationships, which is a big part of the Christian Leader Blueprint.
Absolutely. Relationship for me is the glue that kind of keeps everything together. Mm-hmm. And they can see that, but if you're pursuing after progress, you're not looking for a perfect person, because as you know, I'm not perfect.
Yeah.
And so I can't expect another person to be perfect in everything they do. But if I recruit someone on the team that I think progress is possible,
Yeah.
now I open up a huge opportunity.
Can I pause right there and just
Absolutely.
say, there's a ton of people that deal with perfectionism. I'm a recovering perfectionist. I have never been perfect, yet I have expected perfection of myself, and then that translates a lot of times into expectations of perfection from other people in our lives that we lead. And that's been a huge growth point for me, an integration, so to speak, of the good and bad within me, to be able to not to reel that back, to reel that perfectionism back, and just expect progress and not perfectionism.
Yeah.
Very, very good point.
Yeah. I'm known by those leaders close to me as a borderline obsessive over certain things, and that's been my biggest challenge, is trying to reel those things back to where I can view it through the lens of, if I give it to them, they're ultimately going to be able to do it better than me.
So just digging into that a little bit more, what does that borderline of obsession with something, what does that kind of look like in practical form?
I want it to be. I want that wow factor in everything that we do. I have a very high expectation of what I want to see, and those people around me.
You want your students and even your staff to have a good time.
Right. I want
while
it
you're
to
doing
be
effective ministry, you want it to be fun.
That's right. I want it to be an electric atmosphere, and I want people when they walk into the room to go, wow, this is awesome. And so when you have that really high expectancy, you have to be really careful on not falling into that I'm pursuing perfection. And so I just have to constantly remind myself we're after progress, not after perfection. So
very good. So I know you well, and so I know that accountability and even teamwork is a very important part of your ministry and a part of your life. How do you create a culture of accountability and teamwork within your leadership team, even from a practical standpoint, things that maybe you have found effective? But how do you create that culture of accountability and teamwork?
So practical things that I do is, whenever we bring on a new staff member, we do a 3-month, a 6-month, and a 1-year evaluation. And that's not just one-sided. That's not me evaluating them. That's them also evaluating me and our other leadership team. So for us, that gives us time to see, are they a good hire? Do you fit? Is student ministry for you? A lot of times people get excited, like, hey, y'all are always doing cool stuff. We want to be a part of that. And then they get in like, I'm not sure this is for us. And then it gives me the opportunity to ask them hard questions, like, and it also, that 3-month window, I can see how are they interacting with students. Is there any glaring red flags that we need to go ahead and address? And then 6 months.
So you mean to tell me you don't avoid those glaring red flags?
Sometimes it takes some time to pop up. So I'm not perfect. But
they're expecting, because you do it systematically, they're expecting sort of a review. So I would assume that a systematic approach to that kind of takes away a little bit of the awkwardness of having to call them into your office.
Most definitely. So whenever they come on staff, I tell them, and then I give them the questions that I'm going to ask them before each evaluation.
You tell them, and that gives the expectation.
It does, and it helps me because I'm a non-confrontational type of a person. I don't personally like conflict or having to confront an issue, and so I found, for me, I had to find a different way of breaking the ice with an individual, because especially for a new staff member, I don't have the relationship glue that I have with a veteran staff member. So before they come, it eases it for both of us. They already know the questions I'm going to ask, and it gives them time to formulate the answer that they would like to give, and that way we can kind of work together through some maybe tougher conversations that we wouldn't have been able to have if we didn't want to have to break the ice and ask them ourselves. So
that's good. So that brings accountability. Talk about teamwork a bit and how you kind of roll that into accountability.
Yeah, so once they make it to about a year, I've involved them throughout that, so I can kind of see where they're fitting in. What are they super organized? Are they really artsy? Are they like a creative? Where do they need to be? Is it in event planning? Is it in follow up? Is it in guest relation type stuff? Where do they need to be? And so and then their character matters, like how's their personality. So then I try to piece them, and sometimes it's trial and error, to be honest with you. You put that person with someone you think they'll jive with, and they can kind of build that other relationship within the organization. So
what type of things, personality characteristics or whatnot, that would you be looking for are you, and when I mean, I guess to clarify, that would be, are you looking at extroverted, introverted, different stuff like that?
Stuff like that, yeah, for sure.
Trying to pair them with jobs that would best fit them.
Correct, yeah. We'll try to figure out, and my favorite thing is send them on a trip. If they're on a trip with students, it brings out the good and the bad really quick. So, but are they hyper? Do they crash when it gets late? Things like that. And then obviously their personality traits, if they're extrovert, introvert, things like that.
So you're at a place now in your ministry, and you weren't always there in the recent past, but you're at a place now where you're not just needing warm bodies, you're needing people that can be effective in ministry. And there was a time, and I just want to mention to our listeners, there was a time that you just needed warm bodies to make things happen, and sometimes you're in that place and you just deal with what you have, but you're looking for specific opportunities of things to kind of support maybe where you lack in, right? Mm-hmm. So what are you strong in, and what do you struggle with in your, from a leadership perspective?
So to answer kind of like the first part, that I would say to maybe like a youth pastor who's currently in that place of, I just need help, like I need people. As tough as it is right now, I would kind of refer them to what I've learned is never hire when you're desperate, because if you hire out of desperation, it's not going to make it any better. A warm body doesn't fix an issue, and
so you say don't hire warm bodies.
Do not hire warm bodies. As bad.
Is there a method of using somebody though, and not actually hiring them, but let's say you're planning a retreat and you just don't have enough staff to be able to effectively pull it off. Do you not do the retreat?
No, I think you do the retreat.
Maybe get parents involved or something.
You have to be really clear because what you don't want to do is lead them on with the understanding, if you don't paint that picture really clear for an individual that we're bringing you on for this specific event, then they could wrongly clearly assume, hey, look, I'm becoming a staff member. Yeah. And then your veteran staff members that are the lifeline that you have right now you could devalue them because they didn't go through the same process that they did. So, but I always recommend to wait it out, tough it out, and to get some grit and suck it up for a little bit. You just don't want to hire when you're desperate, because you could really destroy a good culture by a wrong hire. And I would rather wait it out and hire the right person.
And just for clarification, he's not talking about hiring as in paying somebody. Yeah. He's talking about recruiting volunteers.
That's
right. We're not to that place.
We're not.
So, but that makes sense. So, how do you balance empowering your team members to take ownership of their areas of responsibility while still providing guidance and support? And what I'm talking about here, obviously, is delegation. Mm-hmm. And so, effective delegation is empowering them and still, not micromanaging them, still providing guidance and support. How do you pull that off with 35 team members?
It's challenging. But what I've found, especially over the past year, because I had came to a place to where I was delegating, but then I was basically just trying to do it again. But what I've learned, and Jesus did the same thing, is I delegate authority. I don't delegate a task. If you delegate the authority to someone, you empower a leader. But if you delegate a task, you create a follower. And if you delegate the task, they may do the task, but that's all they're going to do. They're going to do the task that you delegated to them.
Great point.
But if you delegate authority to someone, now I created someone who can be creative in the area of influence that I've given them. And so then they feel like they take on ownership. They're excited about it. You didn't just give them a job to do because they already have a job. They're working a 9 to 5 every day, and they're coming here for something different. This is a calling. And so if I can delegate authority to them, which is what Jesus did with the disciples, it creates someone who could possibly change the world. So
that's very good.
I like,
that's a hard thing to do as well, because
it is.
It's easier just to say, hey, go do this, rather than painting a vision for what may be in the future and saying, hey, I want you to help this ministry get here in this area of ministry. You know, you're having to communicate really well.
You do. And Jesus was a master communicator, which is why he was able to do it. And I don't always get it right, but what I've seen is if it's an event, when I delegate the authority to say, hey, here's your area of influence, create anything you want within this, because I have built relationship with that individual, they already know the way I like things.
Yeah.
And so then I'm not over their shoulder constantly. Obviously, I do follow up and make sure they don't need anything, or if they do, I come alongside and help. But for them, they own that activity. They own that night of the event that we're planning, and then they own it, and so they're excited about it, and then they're more apt to do that same thing in the future. So,
yeah, that's very good. And this next question kind of goes in line with the same sort of thing, but aligning vision and your mission. Your mission doesn't really change, but your vision may change. Mm-hmm. Where you're headed towards. And I like to look at vision from a 3 to 5 year perspective. Where am I headed? Where do I see myself going in the next 3 to 5 years? And so, how do you ensure that your leadership team is in line with that vision and mission? How do you communicate that effectively to them?
You can teach what you know, but you automatically duplicate who you are. And so I can...
Say that one more time.
You can teach what you know, but you duplicate who you are. And so when I'm in a room, my job is to lead them by example. I want them to see, how do I interact with students? If I stand in the back of the room and don't go and engage with people, my staff will automatically start staying in the back of the room and not engaging with students. But if they see me constantly engaging with students, if they see me writing cards, it comes from the culture, and I try to create the culture and let the culture dictate what we do and what we don't do. Because I can get in a staff meeting and say what I'm passionate about or say what I want them to do, but if I don't model that in front of them, they're going to follow what I'm doing.
Yeah.
So I try to let
it's not just lip service. It's you've got to make sure that you're actually exampling what you're. So, but you mentioned a staff meeting. How often are you communicating forward thinking, vision, et cetera, with in a staff meeting or other meetings? How do you do that systematically?
So with all 3 grade groups, so we have junior high, high school, and college. I do a staff meeting on the first Tuesday of every month. Mm-hmm. Now we meet periodically between those times with individual groups, but with everybody corporately together. That's where I'm communicating the overarching vision that we're pursuing in that season. And so that's where I can kind of follow up with them. How are they doing? We're asking questions. I'm kind of painting the picture of the direction we're going, and that's kind of how we handle that.
Okay, so usually once a month, but I would assume that you're also maybe trying to slip vision in private conversations or whatever. You're always looking for opportunities to create that and paint that picture for them. So when you have people, this may be different in your leadership, I don't know, but in my leadership, when I'm working with people, I often see conflict of different sorts. You may have perfection, as we talked about earlier, but most people are going to have a little conflict in their ministries and in their lives. I know that's the case for you from time to time. How do you handle conflict or disagreements within your team? Maybe with you and a team member directly, or with team members, with one another. How do you handle that?
Get them both a venti latte.
Coffee fixes everything.
Coffee covers a multitude of disagreements. No, with 35 people, and obviously the larger the organization, if you have people, you have backstories that are different, you have opinions that are different, you have motives that are different, you have ideas. And so when you have all of these people in the same room working towards a goal, you have to understand there's going to be disagreement. But what we have tried to do is, and whenever I have a strong disagreement, I have to get in the middle of it, which is not, I don't want to make it sound like I have to do that all the time, but I try to let the vision settle the disagreement, because if I can paint the vision as the carrot, and when I say that, I mean, if I have two staff members who are trying to create something, and I just say, what if this event is able to change a young person's life? If a high schooler is coming to church for the very first time tonight, and what we're building has the opportunity to change this person's eternal destiny based on what we can create. Now, what I've done is shifted the focus from the individual back to the vision. I redirected their perspective, because they're not enemies. We're trying to build something, and if we can redirect that perspective.
So from a selfish perspective to a kingdom perspective.
Right. And if you have an opinion, you want your opinion to be right.
Yeah, I'm often selfish.
Yeah. as we all can be. But if as the leader you can redirect that to say, the person next to you is not the enemy.
Yeah.
We're after trying to reach a student in this youth group or a first time visitor. So if we can change that perspective from looking at the person to looking at the person we're trying to reach, and you just make that vision so clear that the person in our culture, that because you had the relationship with them most of the time, they'll say, hey, I'm willing to sacrifice my opinion to see that win. Yeah. I want that win to be so big and so clear and so valuable to the staff member that they're like, hey, I don't have to win this argument. I would rather see the student be reached. And so whenever you do that, I think it paints the picture.
So when, which I agree, I think that's a phenomenal method to start with, but when that doesn't work, when the conflict is still there, do you kind of skirt around the issue? How does that go for you?
So Psalms 25 says that all the ways of the Lord are mercy and truth, and that's the way I try to lead. I try to lead in with mercy, and I try to give both of them mercy, and then I try to teach them both, hey, it's not really about being right or wrong. Ultimately, what we're going to do here is we're going to pursue after reaching lost students. Our goal is to reach people for eternity. And so regardless if I may have to end up choosing between one or the other, I try to communicate it in a way that I'm not choosing an individual, but I'm trying to choose what's best for the team and what's best for the event. And to this day, I haven't had one that's just been so bad that we just can't get over it.
Yeah.
And I think the culture itself, because of the relationship, now the picture may look different if you don't have a relationship with those people that you're trying to lead. They may feel violated. They may feel like you're forgetting about them or overlooking them. But because they know that the motive is pure, that everybody in the room, we really all want the same thing.
Yeah.
You really don't come across those conflicts where people are just so dug in to their opinion that they won't release it.
Yeah. I love that you're pulling scripture in to the mercy and truth part of it. I happen to know you very well, and I know that you have a high compassion. And oftentimes when you have a high compassion, a lot of times that passive aggressive kind of behavior, if you're not aware of it and conscious of it and effectively dealing with it, you can become passive aggressive. And I find that a lot with pastors and church leaders, because whether they're naturally compassionate, a lot of times the Spirit of God will bring a compassion. And so when you're that compassionate, it's hard to kind of sort through that and deal effectively with conflict. But if you approach it with mercy and truth, and even John chapter 1 verse 14 says grace and truth. Mm-hmm. If you approach it with mercy and grace and truth, it makes a huge difference in your effectiveness. And like you said, there's nothing really out there that you can't deal with if you deal with it with mercy and grace and truth. Mm-hmm. Because if you have too much mercy and grace, which is what happens a lot of times when you have high compassion, what happens there? You're a lot of times you don't deal with the issue. Mm-hmm. You just keep extending grace and mercy. But if you have only truth, then you're too hard-nosed with it, and you turn people away, and relationships are sometimes even destroyed because of that. But when you combine the two, you love people, you care for people, and you give them the truth, then you can grow and make them, have a more effective organization.
Absolutely.
So to promote along the same lines of even the dealing with conflict, the opposite side of that would be kind of, or not the opposite, but to kind of head it off so you don't have as much conflict, is promoting unity and collaboration. How do you do that? We've spoken to that a little bit in our interview already, but kind of speak to that a little more, unity and collaboration.
So we try to have fun together. I think leaders really underestimate the value of what fun.
That's something that you bring to the table. You enjoy having fun.
I do.
And that's really a really high strength of yours, and even a motivator of yours. So you're using your strength to help bring that unity and collaboration.
I try real hard.
Yeah.
But we try to have fun, because what I don't want a staff member to do or ever feel is that they're a part of this team for me to get something from them. Mm-hmm. I want it to truly feel like we're all contributing to the same goal. Yeah. We're trying to reach after something, and so whenever you do that, that in itself creates that environment or that culture of collaboration. And then when we're having fun, then that just makes everybody feel excited. We're all having fun. We're all doing the same thing together, and we're enjoying it. Mm-hmm. If you're miserable in ministry, I think you're doing it wrong. I don't think that doing ministry, obviously it has seasons to where it is a grind, but the overarching thing of ministry should not be, I'm miserable. Yeah. You should be having fun in ministry. So we try to promote that as much as possible.
And my bent is more productivity and less fun. And so I, as a leader that has that bent, I have to be very intentional about recruiting people around me that know how to have fun. And that's regardless of whether I can do it or I need to recruit somebody. It's very important to the team to enjoy one another and essentially play together.
Yeah,
have fun together.
Yeah.
So growth obviously needs to be ongoing. You've exampled that in your life in a great way. How do you develop and invest in your team members' spiritual growth and leadership ability, leadership skills? What resources or strategies have you found most helpful for doing that?
It may sound really basic, but I think to start with, prayer. If you're a youth pastor, or if you're a leader of any ministry, and you're not praying for your staff members, I think you're doing them and yourself a massive disservice.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to be upset or critical or cynical of a staff member when I'm praying for them, and I'm praying for them, for God to give them direction.
Great point.
I think that sometimes we overlook the simple things of I am praying for them. I'm asking God to give them wisdom. I'm asking Him to give them knowledge in the season that they're in, and how to impact, how to communicate better to students. I'm asking God, number one, to give spiritual help, because I can't do that, but I can ask God to help them and give them strength, and open up opportunities for me to be able to minister, or someone else to be able to minister to them in a way that they need. Because you want healthy staff members. You want staff members who are pursuing after God, so I have to pursue after God as well.
Yeah.
And then probably more practical. If there's a conference, if there's things that come available, sometimes maybe you're in a district, and your district does things for your for youth ministries. I would definitely say sign up for those types of things. It's amazing to get in the room with other youth leaders, because then you realize, like, you're not the only one struggling with those things. Yeah. Everybody's going through it. Everybody's trying to learn, how do you communicate today? How do you change this? How do you keep an edge? And so it gives you that sense of, like, I'm not alone. And then, but obviously there's some conferences that we're just not financially capable of bringing every staff member of 35. It gets expensive.
Right.
So if it's possible to bring our department leaders, we'll bring our department leaders. And then if it's not possible to bring all the department leaders, then I try to go. And then I'll bring information back and pass it out, or teach it at a staff meeting, things like that.
That's good. Yeah. So you're looking for creative ways that doesn't always involve money.
Correct.
In order to develop them. I would assume maybe even recommending books, or
no doubt,
stuff like that. But so your I guess your platform that you would use to deliver that kind of stuff would be basically staff meetings, and then your one-on-one meetings. Maybe you evaluate. I don't know, that maybe that's a question in when you evaluate of what types of things are you growing in and all. So this is the last question. I always end this with anyone that I interview, and this doesn't have to relate to the topic that we discussed today. It can, but what's one thing you wish you could tell your younger self?
Great question. I think for me, as I was growing in ministry, I always felt like I needed to wait for the right opportunity to make a move, to try to create something fresh. And that's probably what I would tell my younger self is, don't wait to start creating what you see in your mind, that God's given you the vision to implement it today. And there's never going to be the perfect opportunity. The stars aren't ever going to align.
So progress instead of perfection.
You've got to just go after it and create it. If you see it in your head, then start doing the work with your hands, and create the culture that you believe God's given to you. That would be what I would tell myself. So
yeah. So a half achieved vision is better than not having a vision at all and not working towards anything at all.
Absolutely. Yeah,
that's great. Well, Pastor Garen, this has been a tremendous conversation, and I just want to thank you so much for giving us and the listeners your time. It's been a pleasure to have you on the podcast.
It's been an honor.
And if people want to connect with you in some way, where can they find you online?
I'm on Instagram, Garen_Stanley. And if you're cool and you're on BeReal, it's YouthPastorGaren.
I don't even know what BeReal is. I'll be sure to put the links in the show notes so that you can connect with Garen if you would like. And if you're a new listener, be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to audio podcast or on YouTube. And also, it would just make my day if you would take a few minutes to rate the show and write a review on Apple Podcast or wherever you listen. My name is Ryan Franklin. Thank you so much for joining us on the Christian Leader Made Simple podcast.